So apparently I'm talking about... I didn't think I was talking at all. Joseph told me Joseph told me last week in Tech Stack Exchange chat, by the way, you're talking or something like that. I always do what it is. So I want to talk today about LuaLATEX. So LuaTEX has been around for quite a while, and LuaLATEX has been around for probably most of that time. But in the last year, 18 months, and the LaTeX team, we've done a lot of work to try to make LaTeX support the extended tech engines out of the box. So before we come to LuaTEX, so eTech, for example, came out in 1990 something. But LaTeX macros didn't know that, so the allocation macros would only allocate 256 diamond registers, even though there were 2 to the 15 of them in eTech and 2 to the 16 of them in LuaTEX. And after a while, even though stability is a good thing, it becomes hard to justify why you're not actually acknowledging reality. So this is a brief overview. What happened before, what happened this year, something about naming, and something. 2016's possibly close enough for the future that we might have some idea what may happen in the future. Okay, so until last year, this year's release, the LaTeX allocation. So in tech, there are certain registers, so a fixed number of registers to store either integers or boxes or whatever, and there's 256 of each type. And normally the way tech macros work is that you use a macro. It's not a primitive, a macro like new box, which gives you a name. So you go new box, my box, and it allocates the next free box, say 27 or something, and then you use my box in your code, and it's really box 27. But when it runs out of the new box macro, and it runs out of allocations, it gives an error. So there's no room for a new box. As I said, the new box macro from plain tech will do that at 256. Unless somebody changes the macros, it'll do that even if you're using a tech engine that's got 65,000 registers. And some users found this less than intuitive, that they were getting error messages on the 256 register when they knew they got 65,000 of them.
I know there's still gas in the tank.
And so anyway, we started to make some provisions so that when you're making the format at any tech stage, LaTeX will detect what engine it's using and use a suitable allocation scheme. So, as in any change in macro languages, there's dangers in doing this, that people depend on all kinds of weird low-level details of the code, like the 15th token is an open brace or something. So you can't change anything without the potential of breaking something, but this seemed that we would do it anyway. So obviously people did use these extended registers. So there was the eTech package, which sort of kind of half wrote, right from when eTech came out, which gave a different allocation scheme which used the full range. But the problem with having an allocation scheme in a package is you've already allocated several boxes before the package is loaded, and then you allocate some more boxes or dimensions after the package is loaded, and so this leads to all kinds of nasty package loading orders because there is only one set of boxes. There can only really be one allocation scheme, so changing it mid-document is always slightly problematic.
Well, you're saying that there's a limit of 256 boxes, but the number of counters can be very large. No. In LuaTeX there are 65,000 box registers. Okay. But the new box macro will give an error. I didn't understand what the problem was.
Well, if you take the tech new box macro and go new box my box.
It's got 256 in code.
The macro goes splat if it goes more than 256.
But tech deals with the insertions top down, I think, from 256.
No, don't worry about insertions. Just do boxes for now. Simply.
Well, you need a box for an insertion.
What? Yeah, but there's
too much detail.
Or keep going.
So, 256
not in LuaTeX it doesn't.
Yeah, in LuaTeX it's different in LuaTeX. Lots of things are different in LuaTeX. So in LuaTeX the situation was kind of worse in that the standard LuaTEX packages people use first loaded the ETEC package to give them an extended allocation range, except the allocation range is, hello Michael, the extended allocation range is wrong because it was written for ETEC, which has 2 to the 15 registers, and LuaTEX has 2 to the 16. And there are various other differences. When it was written, ETEC package was written in the 1990s, it was not written for LuaTEX. So what people have been doing up until this year was, or at least what the packages were doing on their behalf, was first loading the ETEC package and then patching the macros they've just loaded to correct them for LuaTEX. And also they only allocated things that PlainText really knew about, like boxes and count registers. It wasn't allocating everything that LuaTEX knows about, which includes things like LuaTEX capture tables and attributes. Well, capture tables were, attributes were, functions weren't. So it wasn't fully really aware of all the LuaTEX features. But the LuaTEX base package by Eliru and Manuel, whatever, did a really good job of supporting most things people wanted to do in LuaTEX. But again, because it's a package, it had the same problem as the ETEC package, that you really needed to load it early, preferably before the format was made, because it's changing a lot of things, and you really want to know it's loaded. Yeah. So anyway, at the end of last year, 2014, so we're in planning for what we're going to do in the 2015 release, we basically decided, Joseph and I sort of basically decided and convinced everybody else that we really should make it format making time that the format should recognise what engine it's using and do something a bit more sensible. So in 2015 01 release, LaTeX will detect it's running. Oh look, missing space after LuaTEX. I wonder how that happened. It detects it's running on ETEC or LuaTEX or ZTEC. The allocation changes, and in LuaTEX, the actual tech primitives get enabled, which I'll come to in a minute. So it actually had, for the first time, well, no, not the first time. If you look in the LaTeX.LTX, the source code for the LaTeX format, it has a lot of code detecting Tech 2 or Tech 3, and making all the Tech 3 features are faked so that it will build a format on Tech 2. But this is not very relevant these days. Not many people are using Tech 2. Tech 3 came out in, we're looking at Chris, somewhere.
Tech 90.
Fun?
1990.
Yeah, I guess it's 1990, something like that. So it had all that.
That would be Tech 3.
Yeah, so it had all that code for detecting sort of engine differences, but it didn't have code to detect the engine differences that people actually have now. So we added code of a similar nature in a way to detect ETEC and ZTEC and LuaTEX. So what we did? Okay, so you've got the extended ranges. So in LuaTEX, by default, it really doesn't have any extra primitives and standard tech, but you can call a Lua command which enables all the extra tech features. And previously that was in the sort of contrib area. So the LuaLATEX format people used had these primitives because they were enabled in the LuaLATEX.ini file, which Carlisle maintains as part of TechLive. But we pulled that all back into the main, almost all back into the main LaTeX format. So one thing that the previous packages didn't do, probably because I hadn't noticed, it wasn't exactly massively documented. ZTEC and LuaTEX have 255 rather than 16 math fams. There's some problems in allocating beyond the range 16 because the syntax of a math char def, for those who use that sort of thing, it's a bit packed format. So the number has so many bits to say what the character code is, so many bits to say when it's an operator or a relation or whatever, and so many bits to say what font it's from. And you can't go beyond 16 with that. The actual syntax stops that. So we in LaTeX now you can use more than 16 for math alphabets, so like fractor, because there you're not using a math char def, you just use ABC, and you say make it sans serif, make it bold, make it italic. So you can have 255 different math fams for that, but you can only use 16 for things where you'd like sine, not sine, sum or integral or right hook, arrow, whatever, where you actually need to specify a specific fan in the syntax. And then, as well as allocating things for a bigger range, there's more things to allocate. So ETEC has had an extended mark system since whenever. So there's a new marks thing that gets defined if you're running ETEC. And ZTEC has a notion of an inter-character class. So these are tech code that gets inserted between characters of certain classes. It's mostly used for line breaking in Asian fonts. So this again was previously defined in the ZTEC INI file, but we pulled it in, so it's now defined in the format if you're running on in ZTEC. So this doesn't do an awful lot for LuaTEX, apart from just a basic allocation. It doesn't allocate. We kind of basically ran out of time and shipped the January release with that level. But then we had a second release this year, in October, where basically we've tried to bring the support for LuaTEX up to the same level. So all the extra things that LuaTEX has, which has that attributes and whatsits and Lua functions, we have allocators just like NewBox, but allocating different things for those in the format. So almost all this code was copied from LuaTEX base, and I should mention that people. I mean, obviously, if someone's maintaining a package, if somebody else says we want to make your package obsolete, not everybody will take that well, but they took it really well and said, yes, please, we'd like you to do that. So they really helped and explained anything that wasn't clear. And we haven't copied exactly the same code in all places, but they really smoothed the transition. And the old code is still on GitHub just for comparison, but on CTAN, they basically moved the old code and it's all been pulled back into the format, and then with some extra code I'll talk about in a minute. So that's really what happened in October. The old LuaTEX base package was also available in and used in plain text, so plain LuaTEX, and so we kept the same structure. So it's in the LaTeX distribution, but in there we make a file LT LuaTEX. There's a tech file and a Lua file. So the whole code is designed to run in Unitex on a plain format. So you can use that code to make a plain LuaTEX format with support for suitable allocations. And I believe that's what they're doing. I've misspelled the.
Still more than accepted spelling.
So.
And you're missing the parentheses.
This I wrote. Oh, whatever. I was just proofreading this when somebody suddenly said I had to give my talk now. So,
We're helping you.
so for all the functionality of the old LuaTEX base code is really in the format. But obviously, if you've got an existing package, and there are some really complicated Asian packages that are really using every single nook and cranny of those formats, you really want not just the functionality, but really the same syntax, just so you don't break your package. So we in the contrib area, though it's by Joseph himself, we have a LuaTEX base package that's pretty complete emulation of the old LuaTEX base, but it's using the underlying LaTeX code. So it's an interface layer sort of wrapper, So, and I'm not going to say too much about this. The other feature that really came from Heiko's package, LuaTEX, was a mechanism for managing cat code tables. So in LuaTEX, you can, rather than changing one cat code, which is a way to process a single character at a time, you can sort of set up a whole table of them and switch these whole tables in and out in one go. At the macro level, those packages had a stack mechanism for switching context, which is not possibly that useful, but we supply functionality for that and a full emulation in the LuaTEX base. So those packages are available. They're on GitHub as a support, as a development area, so people can do pull requests and things, and they're on CTAN and Tech Live. And we haven't had too many people commenting that their packages have been broken by having the entire underlying level taken out from under them. Yes, that's available on well, if you've got an update Tech Live, you've got it already. So apart from allocations, the other thing we did, so in so as I said previously, in the Unitech file, in the Unitech configuration, all LuaTEX specific primitives were given names beginning with LuaTEX. So in the LuaTEX manual, there would be a command like text here, text direction. In LuaLATEX, it would be called LuaTEX text here. So all LuaTEX primitives have this prefix. And that was done with good intentions. It gives things sort of more weird names, less likely to clash with your own macros. And it's sort of similar to what PDF Tech did with when it introduced commands like PDF resolution or PDF page height or whatever. But there's a slight difference in that most of the PDF something macros are at least arguably to do with PDF. I mean, if you have PDF page width, it's sort of the width of the page in the PDF file rather than being some command that happened to have been introduced by PDF Tech rather than Classic Tech. Whereas these ones aren't anything to do with Lua at all. Typically, it's just happened to be introduced by LuaTEX. And it's especially bad when it's then picked up by a different engine, say ZTech, and obviously doesn't want the LuaTEX prefix. So anyway, when we pulled this in the 01 release, we kept naming, but in this October release, we've dropped all the prefixes. So now all the LuaTEX commands are enabled with their natural name. This is in some ways more of a radical change than the allocation. It's more like the break stuff. But we did do a full search before we did this of all the packages on Tech Live that use these names, and we basically persuaded their authors to make them work with both sets of names before the release. All the authors we could reach, that is. Most of these commands aren't the kind of commands that people use in documents, so it's mostly package authors that get affected by this, and there was only like 8 or something. It wasn't like hundreds of packages affect on Tech Live. Some packages obviously use it a lot. But this change happened. If you use the LuaTEX base emulation, several commands get both names. So yeah, as I say, we contacted all the authors, and that's gone relatively smoothly. Although this went out in October, so it's not been out that long. And oh yeah, so in a way, it's a good thing we did this. In that, in Classic Tech, you expect the Tech engine to be very stable, famously frozen. LuaTEX is not like that. Its version number is less than 1, and that's kind of a warning. It's pre-release software, and it changes quite a lot with each release. In particular, they changed the name of primitives. They removed primitives. They add primitives. At the last release, also, we've had warning of the next release. Basically, as functionality, as the Lua side of it becomes more powerful, some of the tech primitives that they added, they decide aren't really necessary anymore because you can do it in Lua, and so they basically just remove them. It's much easier to handle this if it's been handled in one place. Basically, the LaTeX core development team can smooth this out to a certain extent. If individual packages are using these commands and having to manage the name changes, it's far harder to coordinate it. So yeah, that's hopefully this mainly affects us. I mean, the one advantage of pulling it into the core is it mainly affects Jesse for me, I think. Hopefully we can. There's some discussion to do about how much to. Obviously, if the LuaTEX engine removes a command, you either have to live with that and just tell the users it's gone, or you can sort of fake it in tech macros to a certain extent. And there are pros and cons of both, and you have to kind of make a decision on each case, or what's the thing to do. Because the tech macro never behaves precisely the same as the old primitive. In particular, it's always got at least one expansion step before it does something, and that can show up. Okay, so 2016 is after Christmas, apparently. Yes, so currently, because Joseph spoke about the test suite in terms of the LaTeX 3 code this morning, we have a similar test suite running on the LaTeX 2E distribution, and then all the associated packages like tools, multi-call, long table things. So currently, just the base, ignoring all the packages, there's 300 or so tests. If we're making a new release, obviously we try to pass the test. So we currently require PDF Tech and ZTech to pass them all. In the case of ZTech, we do have a few extra where the output isn't exactly the same, or typically, if it's using input-env, the test file just doesn't work with ZTech, and you just kind of give it a stub output. So for LuaTEX, it fails 60, which isn't so many, but it's quite a reasonable. It's sort of more than you want to fail, and mostly this is not actually a problem with LuaTEX. It's the log output isn't sufficiently the same that our normalization makes it the same. We could just check in 60 LuaTEX specific log files and declare it a passed, but really we want to understand. People who've got a LaTeX document, they come in on LuaLATEX and they want to know what's likely to have changed. And one way we can answer that question is by understanding what's actually happened here, and whether it is just a difference in logging, or whether it's actually, sometimes it's a different line breaking, for example. It could be various things. So we're not just declaring these passed, we're leaving them as failing, and we consequently we don't require LuaTEX for a new LaTeX release. We don't by default run the LuaTEX test suite. We don't insist that it passes because it fails. But certainly I'd hope we get to a point next, maybe not for if we do a release in January, but certainly sometime during 2016 I'd hope to get to a point where LuaTEX is passing and then mandated to always pass the LaTeX test suite, so that any LaTeX release will have a known status with respect to LuaTEX. Because people are using it an awful lot and expect that we are supporting that code, and if we just sort of deny knowledge and say we only support classic tech, it's not really serving the community the way we want to. So that's what I hope to happen, that we do get LuaTEX to be a position that's a fully supported engine.
Come in.
They can't come in, it's locked. Thank you. And that is actually my last slide. Oh, I don't know how long it took me, not very long.
Whilst
anyway.
they're having tea, I can see whether the cable works.
You can see whether the cable works, and I can take questions unless somebody wants to